Hello and welcome everyone. This is Grandmaster Sam Shankland, and I'm here to do my third and final video on the power of the bishop pair. So, in the first video, we saw the bishop pair kind of cruising straight through Vladimir Kramnik. That should be an advertisement good enough for anyone to realize that the bishop pair is a serious force that has often to be reckoned with. But in the second video, we saw that if a bishop pair is improperly used, or if it's not really working up to its full potential, it can just be bad, and it needs to have open lines. So what we're going to do in the third one is I'm going to go over another one of my games. And like I said in a previous video, I generally try not to do that, but well, this one I've looked at in a bit more detail because I've annotated it a couple times, and I think I have some interesting notes on it. So this game was taken from U.S. Championship 2014. I was playing against Farouz Janakovian with the white pieces. So the opening wasn't, wildly relevant to the topic at hand, so just go through it quickly. Started off as a Karo Khan, advanced variation, and ultimately we got to a situation here where black played knight g7, and in my opinion, he should play knight takes d4. And after c takes d4, knight e7, there are some complications, but I believe black's okay. Instead, after knight g7, this gave white the opportunity to grab this bishop pair. And it's an opportunity I decided to capitalize on. So knight takes f5, knight takes f5. So here, this is the first moment where white has the bishop pair this game. And what we should notice is it's kind of somewhere in between the Kasparov game and the Radjabov game. In the Radjabov game, the bishops were really stuck. They weren't doing much, and white certainly had the potential to break them open with moves like f4, f5 there. But they just never came into fruition. Well, here, the bishops are not bad. They have open diagonals, but at the same time, black's position is very solid, and it's not easy to come up with a plan to really showcase their full power. And in particular, the bishop on c1, it doesn't really have a ton of great squares. So, game continued, bishop d3, bishop c5. Bishop c5 looks a little bit weird to me. I would prefer bishop e7 or g6. In any case, knight d2. So you should always be on the lookout for tactics, just making sure knight takes e5 does not work, because after bishop f5 and rook e1, black is encountering some problems on the e-file, and if he tries to save the knight, then knight f3, and after castle just takes, and rook e5 will lose the d5 pawn for black. So knight takes e5 is not possible. Black played g6, which seems natural enough. He's doing something that's very smart generally against the bishop pair, which is if you have a bishop and knight against two bishops, you want to put your pawns on the same color as your opponent's unopposed bishop. So here, black is getting all of his pawns on white squares, which is doing a pretty good job of restricting this unopposed white squared bishop. But still, I think white has a reasonably good position. So knight f3, and now black played knight h4, which looked kind of weird to me. I don't really get the point of this move. I thought trading the knight on f3 was not especially useful for black. I mean, I don't know if it's bad for him, but I didn't think it was worth the tempo. So after rook e1, I had to defend the pawn on e5 because the knight was the key defender. Knight takes f3, queen takes f3. It's another one of these positions where you have to come up with a plan to actually open up your bishops. So what I'd like everyone to do is pause their videos and think to themselves, what plans does white have at his disposal to activate his bishops so that they're significantly more effective than they are now? Okay, so I'd like everyone to keep their videos paused if they're not done with that. But basically white has two pawn breaks at his disposal in this position. One is c4, and the other is h5. Now, there's no doubt that he's not even close to ready for either one, but that's eventually what he should be aiming for. These moves will open up black's position and allow the bishop pair to shine through in ways they otherwise wouldn't. So rook c8, and I played a3. Just to control the b4 square, if I'm going to play c4 someday, I thought I wouldn't want to deal with knight b4 or anything like that. And black played bishop e7. He could have castled, which is a thought for sure. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, but I think he was quite worried about the move bishop h6 and queen g3. And here white is ready to crash through with h4, h5, which is a lot faster than black would like to admit. I would be quite worried if I were black here that I could get checkmated in short order. Black decided to play bishop e7, and with this move he's carrying a strategic threat. Just think to yourselves for a moment, what is black's idea with bishop e7 and what should I do about it? Okay, so if you want more time, please keep your videos paused. Black would like to play the move bishop g5, which trades off the trump in white's position, the bishop pair. So white has to prevent that somehow, and I chose the move queen g3. And at this point, black could chase my queen away from the g5 square by playing bishop h4, and if I had to play something like queen h3 after bishop g5, I think black should be okay. But luckily, I can play queen g4, which still controls the g5 square. And now, if black really wants to chase my queen away, he has to weaken himself with h5, and after queen h3, we see that this weakness actually counts because bishop g5 fails to bishop takes g6, and after fg6, queen e6, black has to play bishop e7 because if king f8, I can take this one, and after queen takes g5, queen takes c8 is winning. Queen takes e6 check, bishop e7, and after queen g6 check, white now has 3 pawns and a huge attack for the piece, and black is in serious trouble. So black played a6, which was putting his last pawn onto a light square. Again, very consistent with the concept of playing against the active bishop I do have. So I played bishop h6, which is a nice activating move. And black didn't want to allow bishop g7, I guess, so he played bishop f8, bishop f4, and now bishop g7, and I think this is a big mistake. I would prefer bishop e7. I'd like everyone to pause their videos and think to themselves, how should white take advantage of this poor move, bishop g7? Alright, so if you want more time, keep your videos paused. I believe the best move is h4, because now black cannot prevent white from playing h5, which is one of the key mechanisms white had to further open the position. And at this point, black is in serious trouble. For instance, if he were to play h5 himself, this does stop h5, and it even prepares bishop h6 to trade the bishops. But we see a familiar tactical shot with the move bishop takes g6, and after fg6, queen g6, king f8, and queen e6. Once again, white has 3 pawns and a very strong initiative, and that's something black wants no part of. So black is forced to let white play h5. And his biggest problem now is that the rook on h8 has no real way to get into the game, because the only way for him to activate would be for black to castle, but if black castles after h5, I find it very likely that black will get himself checkmated here. And understandably, Akobian didn't want to do this. So he played bishop back to f8, which is a really sad sign, but I think already the position was very difficult. So h5, bishop e7. Now, unfortunately, white is not able to start sacking yet because the black king will have a happy home on d7, but luckily white can still keep on turning the screws and aim to open the position further. So rook a d1. Now, I was hoping to open the position with c4, and keeping my rook on an open file is good for that. I could have also considered the move b4, with the point that now this knight on c6 is unable to come to a5, which means c4 is going to be much harder to stop. Still, I don't think my move was so bad. So after rook a d1, the game continued knight a5, queen g4, knight c4, rook e2, queen b6. And this is another point, just a general thing that I think people should be aware of, is oftentimes when you have to find the best square for one of your bishops, I've found that oftentimes its original starting square is a good square for it, and the only reason it would not be good would be because it blocks a rook from coming into play. And that's definitely the case here. This bishop on f4 doesn't actually do that much that it doesn't do on c1. The only reason it was bad on c1 is because it blocked the rook on a1 in. Now that the rook is left, white can very happily retreat the bishop back to c1, where it performs a dual role of defending the queenside and is ready to jump into the attack at any moment. So queen c7, queen g3, b5. And once again, here we have sort of a tough situation because white has achieved quite a lot. It's looking like the position is starting to open up in his favor, but still black remains reasonably solid and white needs to figure out how to use the bishop pair. The best way to do that is to come up with a plan that will put more pressure on black's position and give white more options. So they're going to pause their videos and see if they can figure out what white should play. Alright, so in my opinion, I played the best move, which I didn't do the whole game, but I definitely did at this moment, which was bishop c2. And the point of this move is twofold. One, white at some point could play a4, which will open up the queenside, which is probably the best route to the black king. But secondly, white is preparing the rook lift with either rook d3 or rook d4, followed by the rook over to the f file, where I can pressure get the f7 pawn, which is the key defender of g6. So after queen c6, rook d3, it's very difficult for white to deal with this threat of rook f3. So he played rook d8, and now after rook f3, white has several threats. Rook takes f7 is probably a pretty serious idea. For instance, if black were to play d4 or something, in general, this is also not great because it opens the center. But here I would very seriously consider rook takes f7. I think it might just win. In addition, the move queen h3 is also strong, which is now pinning the h-pawn to the rook, so white is threatening h takes g6. And normally black would just move his king, but here the rook on f7, the rook will take f7, so it shows how useful the rook can be on f3. So after rook f3, black found it necessary to play g5 to stop moves like queen h3 or rook f7 from ending the game. And this is a really bad sign for him because if we look, it took a long time, but finally this bishop on c2, the unopposed light-squared bishop, is now wide open. So at this point it has a very nice target on h7, but black could play h6 on the next move to get rid of that target, and then I think white would have a lot of work to do to win. So what should white play in this position? If you want more time, please pause your videos. Alright, so I'm going to keep on going. White has a very strong move here, h6. Of course, you cannot take on g5 because of rook g8, but after h6, he's frozen this pawn on h7 as a permanent weakness, as well as the pawn on g5. White's plan will probably be to something like queen g4, queen h5, at which point f7 is hanging, black will have to play a move like rook f8, and then white can take his pick of which pawns to grab. Note how these bishops, which were not so great for much of the game, are now wide open, pointing towards the weakened black king side, and are ready to start plucking pawns. So black, realizing the writing was on the wall and that his position was going to lose if he didn't do something drastic, tried d4. But this is a very bad sign. He needs to open the position voluntarily, while white's bishops will be absolutely devastating. So queen g4, and now I had calculated some funny lines, but I could just show briefly with queen d5. But I noticed the winning line here was cd4, queen d4, queen h5, and now black doesn't want to play rook f8 because he starts losing all the pawns on the king side. So knight takes e5, but here I realized after rook e5 and queen f7 and rook d3 that white is going to crash through without a ton of trouble. King c8, queen takes e7, takes, queen e1 check, king h2, queen takes c1, and black's up in exchange for now, but after queen takes e6 check, he's not going to hold on to it because the rook on h8 is going to be loose in several lines. For instance, king b8 is just mated after queen b6 check, king c7, queen e5 check wins the rook, king d8, queen f6 check wins the rook, king b7 is arguably most resilient, but after just simply bishop e4 check, king a7, queen e7 check, and here queen f6 check is going to grab the rook, and that's good enough to win the game. That won't be an issue. Going back, I guess that was a little bit tangential, but hopefully it's still interesting. Black tried d takes c3, but after rook takes c3, all of white's pieces are super active. The bishops on c2 and c1 just were totally sprung to life, and they would have won the game easily on their own, so black had to sort of catastrophically weaken his position anyway. Queen b6, and now another strong move, b3, with the idea that after queen a5, it kicks knight. First of all, if knight a5, the point is now bishop takes g5, and we see the strength of this bishop, because rook g8 was the whole reason we could never do this, but now that the knight is left c4 and no longer defends b6, white can play bishop e3, counterattacking the queen, and after rook takes g4, bishop takes b6, white is now up a pawn with all sorts of important stuff hanging in black's position, and he'll easily win. After queen a5, I played queen f3, and black is in serious trouble. So he could have tried knight takes a3, but here we see after strong move b4, opening up these two attackers on the knight on a3, bishop takes b4, rook takes a3, and bishop takes a3. This truly is the bishop pair at their finest. The black king will very, very quickly perish in the center. There's just nothing to be done about that. So after g4, black is now counterattacking the queen, but queen c6 check, king f8, and b4, and now the black queen is trapped because of queen b6, rook takes c4. So black tried bishop takes b4, but after rook takes c4, ab4 is possible, but after queen a1, there's a hanging rook and bishop on c1, and if you were to play rook takes c4, queen takes c1 check is an important in-between move. So I preferred to simply start with rook takes c4, bc4, A takes b4. And here, classically speaking, material is equal, as a bishop is worth 3 pawns and a rook is worth 5, so a rook and pawn is equal to 2 bishops, but as one might guess, the bishops are just totally crushing the rooks here. And after queen a1, queen c5 check, king g8, rook e1, black is just getting mated in addition to all of his other problems, and there's just no way to save himself. I calculated a funny line. If rook d5, I can give a check, and after rook d8, just take the rook, and bishop g5 check wins the queen on a1. Black tried g3 just to get the queens off the board, but this didn't help, because after f takes g3, queen d4 check, takes, bishop g5, black is unable to stop bishop f6, which will force this rook away, and then bishop takes h7, and then the h-pawn will queen. And these bishops are just ravaging the board. Black tried one last draw with rook g8, and white is winning every which way, but I like the way I played, which was bishop a4 check. Now note that this strong bishop here is controlling these two squares, forcing the king to f8, because this bishop is now attacking and controlling these squares. And after king f8, bishop e3, black resigned because this rook is attacked, and once it moves away, bishop c5 will be checkmate. So I thought this was a very good example of getting a decent, if not amazing, bishop pair, and then slowly but surely trying to make sure you open lines by making appropriate pawn breaks to really maximize the potential of those bishops. And as we saw here, once the bishops were finally opened by forcing black to play g5, his position just collapsed immediately. So that'll conclude my series on the bishop pair for now. Maybe I'll return to this topic some other time, but I think that's good for the moment. So thanks much for watching. This is Sam Shankland, and have a good day.